Imagine this for a moment. Someone you've known your entire life suddenly stops moving. Yesterday, they laughed beside you. They walked with you. They helped gather food, carried firewood, and shared the warmth of the campfire as darkness settled over the land. Today, they're completely still. You call their name. Nothing. You shake their shoulder. Nothing. You wait. Still nothing. For us, death is familiar. We understand illness, old age, injuries, and the human body. We know that every living thing eventually reaches the end of its life. But for our earliest ancestors, there was no explanation. There were no doctors, no hospitals, no religion as we know it, no books, no language capable of explaining what had just happened. Death wasn't something they learned about. It was something they had to discover. Imagine experiencing that mystery for the very first time in human history. One moment, a person is laughing, speaking, hunting, and sharing meals with everyone around them. Then, without warning, they're silent forever. They don't wake up. They don't breathe. They never answer again. What would you do? Would you stay beside them? Would you carry them with you? Would you leave them where they fell? Or would you bury them? The answer isn't as simple as many people imagine. In fact, it reveals one of the most important turning points in the story of humanity. To understand why we have to forget everything we know about modern life, forget cities, forget governments, forget cemeteries, funerals, and gravestones. Travel back hundreds of thousands of years to a world where every sunrise brought a new struggle to survive. The Earth looked very different then. Towering forests stretched for miles. Vast grasslands rolled across the horizon. Ice sheets covered enormous parts of the north. Lions, giant Janus saber-toothed cats, wolves, and bears shared the landscape with early humans. Our ancestors weren't rulers of this world. They were just another vulnerable species trying to survive one more day. Every morning began with the same question. Can we find enough food before something finds us? Food was never guaranteed. Some days the hunt failed completely. Gathered plants disappeared with the changing seasons. Rivers dried up. Storms destroyed camps. Long winters pushed entire groups to the edge of starvation. Time wasn't a luxury. It was survival itself. Every hour spent doing one thing meant sacrificing something else. Looking for berries, repairing stone tools, finding clean water, protecting children, watching for predators, searching for shelter before darkness arrived. Stopping for too long could mean the difference between life and death. Now, imagine someone in your group dies. Suddenly, everything changes. The group has difficult choices to make. If they remain where they are, they lose precious daylight. If they carry the body, they move slower. If they stop searching for food, everyone becomes weaker. And if they stay overnight, something else may arrive first. The smell of death carries farther than humans can imagine. Predators notice. Scavengers notice. Wolves, hyenas, and bears don't understand grief. They understand opportunity. To them, a motionless body is simply another source of food. For early humans, that created an impossible dilemma. Stay beside someone you cared about, or protect the living members of your group. Today, that choice feels unimaginably cruel. But survival rarely leaves room for perfect decisions. Many archaeologists believe that for much of early human history, bodies were often left behind. Not because our ancestors lacked compassion, but because they simply couldn't afford another choice. The living still needed food. Children still needed protection. The group still had to keep moving. Nature would eventually take care of the rest. Rain would wash away footprints. Grass would grow. Animals would feed. Wind would erase the signs that anyone had ever been there. For countless generations, this may have been the reality of death. Not ceremony, not memorial, simply survival. Yet something extraordinary eventually happened. At some point in our distant past, people began making a decision that made very little sense from a survival perspective. Instead of walking away, they stayed. Instead of leaving the dead behind, they began placing them carefully into the earth. Think about what that actually required. Without metal tools, without shovels, without organized settlements, digging even a shallow grave meant spending hours breaking hard ground using nothing more than stones, sharpened sticks, antlers, and bare hands. It was exhausting work, work that burned precious calories, work that delayed hunting, work that exposed the group to danger. From a purely practical point of view, it was an expensive decision, which raises one remarkable question. Why would people struggling simply to survive spend so much time caring for someone who could no longer help them? That question has fascinated archaeologists for generations, because hidden beneath layers of ancient earth are discoveries that suggest something profound was beginning to change. Our ancestors were no longer thinking only about survival. They were beginning to think about each other, and the evidence they left behind would completely transform our understanding of what it truly means to be human. The oldest known burials are far older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, and older than the first cities. Hidden inside caves in ancient landscapes, archaeologists have uncovered graves that were deliberately prepared by people who lived tens of thousands of years ago. These discoveries tell us that death was no longer treated as a problem to escape. It had become something worthy of time, effort, and remembrance. One of the most remarkable examples comes from a place known as Shanidar Cave in what is now northern Iraq. There, archaeologists discovered the remains of several Neanderthals buried deep inside the cave. One burial became especially famous because scientists found traces of pollen surrounding the grave. For decades, this led to the beautiful idea that flowers had been placed beside the deceased as a final act of respect. It was a powerful image family, quietly saying goodbye with flowers long before history was ever written. But science is rarely that simple. Later, researchers suggested another possibility. The pollen may have been carried into the cave naturally by burrowing animals or by the wind over many years. Today, archaeologists continue to debate exactly what happened. We may never know whether flowers were intentionally placed there. Yet one fact remains beyond dispute. The body had been carefully positioned inside a prepared resting place. That wasn't an accident. Someone stopped. Someone dug into the ground. Someone chose not to leave. That decision alone tells us something extraordinary. And Shanidar wasn't the only discovery. Across Europe and Western Asia, archaeologists have uncovered other prehistoric burials where individuals appear to have been placed carefully on their sides, sometimes with stone tools, animal bones, or objects from daily life resting nearby. Some graves belonged to adults, others belonged to children. Imagine that for a moment. A child living more than 50,000 years ago. Instead of being abandoned in the wilderness, someone spent hours preparing a place for them to rest. Even in a world where every calorie mattered, where winter could wipe out an entire group, and where predators waited beyond the firelight, people still chose to stop. That choice may tell us more about humanity than any weapon or invention ever could. Of course, not every ancient human buried their dead. Different groups almost certainly responded in different ways. Some may have left bodies where they died. Others may have covered them with stones. Some may have placed them inside caves. Much later, other cultures even practiced cremation or secondary burial, where bones were respectfully moved after the body had naturally returned to the earth. The truth is that archaeology rarely gives us complete answers. It gives us clues, broken pieces of an enormous puzzle, Every new discovery adds another fragment to the story, but many pieces are still missing forever. That's what makes archaeology so fascinating. It doesn't simply tell us what happened. It asks us to imagine lives that disappeared tens of thousands of years ago. But perhaps the most interesting question isn't how people buried their dead. It's why practical reasons certainly existed. Covering a body reduced strong odors. It discouraged scavengers from approaching camp. It helped protect children and food supplies. Those explanations make perfect sense. But many archaeologists believe practicality wasn't the entire story. Because digging a grave takes time. Positioning a body carefully takes intention. Returning to the same burial place takes memory. None of those actions directly help someone survive another day. Instead, they revealed something else, an emotional decision. One based not on immediate survival, but on relationships. Modern animals sometimes display behaviors that look surprisingly similar. Elephants have been observed lingering near the bones of other elephants, gently touching them with their trunks. Chimpanzees sometimes remain beside deceased members of their group for hours, refusing to leave immediately. Orcas and whales have been seen supporting lifeless calves at the ocean's surface, carrying them across incredible distances. These moments remind us that grief is not uniquely human, but humans seem to have taken grief somewhere entirely new. We transformed emotion into ritual. We changed the landscape itself. A grave is more than a hole in the ground. It is an idea made visible. It says this individual mattered. It says this place should be remembered. It says this life deserves more than simply disappearing. That simple act may have changed humanity forever. Because once people begin remembering the dead, they also begin preserving stories. Children learn about those who came before them. Knowledge passes from one generation to the next. Communities become stronger. Identity begins to grow. Some anthropologists even suggest that caring for the dead strengthened cooperation among the living. If you knew your group would care for you after death, you were more likely to care for others during life. Trust became stronger. Families became closer. Communities became more stable. It's impossible to know exactly when that transformation began. There was no single first funeral, no single inventor of burial. Instead, it was likely a slow change that unfolded across thousands of generations as different human groups discovered new ways of expressing care, memory, and belonging. And that may be the most remarkable part of all. When archaeologists uncover an ancient grave, they aren't simply finding bones or stones. They're discovering evidence of compassion, evidence that someone paused their own struggle for survival to honor another human being. Across tens of thousands of years, across countless generations, that quiet decision echoes all the way to us today. We gather for funerals. We build memorials. We visit graves. We tell stories about the people we've lost. We leave flowers. We speak their names. Those traditions may look very different from the simple burials of our ancestors, but they are connected by the same deeply human instinct. The desire to remember. The refusal to let a life simply disappear. Perhaps that is one of the greatest things that separates us from every other species on Earth. Not our intelligence, not our tools, not even our ability to shape the world around us, but our willingness to stop, to remember, and to care. Long before civilizations, kings, monuments, or written history, a handful of prehistoric people made a choice that changed humanity forever. They looked at someone they loved, and instead of walking away, they stayed.